Okay, so what connects a nation's baby names, its youth slang, and its highest halls of political power? Sounds like a riddle, right? Well, the answer actually lies in the very fabric of national identity. Welcome to our explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating intersection of culture, language, and high-stakes politics in the Philippines. We're going to explore how the Filipino identity is transforming, starting all the way down at the micro level of the names parents give their children, right up to the macro level of who holds the reins of national leadership.
I am so glad you're here for this one. If you love connecting the dots between everyday culture and major national events, you are going to find this analysis incredibly rewarding. Together, we're going to map out exactly how a nation's voice evolves and how that evolving voice ultimately shapes its future.
All right, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at Filipino names and heritage, check out the new Gen Z vocabulary, break down the shift in political power, look at the House Speaker leadership crisis, dive into the flood control scandal, and finally, tie it all together with youth, language, and politics. Starting with Section 1, Filipino names and heritage. Tradition meets modernity. You know, the most fundamental piece of our identity is usually the name we're given at birth. It really reflects the hopes, the values, and the cultural vibe of the era we're born into.
Take a look at this data from the Philippine Statistics Authority for the top baby girl names in 2023. You'd think with all the internet trends out there, we'd see some wild, creative spellings dominating the list, right? But nope, traditional, highly meaningful names are totally reigning supreme. The name Althea, which actually comes from Greek mythology and means healing, has literally held that #1 spot for years. And right behind it, Angel and Zoe. This consistency really shows a cultural preference for names that are timeless and carry a deeply positive, wholesome resonance.
But alongside those mainstream favorites, there is this absolutely beautiful, growing movement happening. Parents are actively reclaiming deeply rooted indigenous names. They're looking back to rich Philippine mythology and folklore. We're seeing names like Dewani, the mythological fairy mother of the Mayon volcano, Hiraya, which represents the hope that a wish will come true, and Tala, the goddess of the stars. It's a profound way to anchor the next generation to a uniquely Filipino heritage.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Gen Z vocabulary, evolving language. Because if names are what we're given, language is what we actually create for ourselves. And honestly, no group is reshaping the Filipino linguistic landscape quite like Generation Z.
Check out this entry from the modern Gen Z dictionary, deserve. It's a highly expressive, localized spin on the English word deserve. While older millennials might have used words like tomguts when they were starving, Gen Z drops a deserve when they're treating themselves to their favorite food or checking out that online shopping cart. It's essentially a term of self-care and validation for a generation that openly celebrates personal boundaries and hard-earned rewards.
Another great example of this evolving language is petmalu. This is a syllabic reversal of the Tagalog word malupit. Now, flipping syllables around is actually a cyclical trend in Filipino culture, but Gen Z has totally claimed petmalu to mean something as just awesome, specifically when praising someone who has overcome a really tough situation. Yelling petmalu ka is basically a rallying cry. It shows how this generation uses language not just for fun, but to build a real sense of unity, resilience, and shared struggle.
All right, let's pivot to Section 3, shift in political power, the 20th Congress. We've seen how identity is shaped by cultural roots and youth slang. Now let's look at how the national identity is shaped by the halls of power, specifically the recent massive shakeups.
This timeline maps out an absolutely wild period of intense, rapid political change. The 20th Congress convened in July 2025, but by September, intense investigations into flood control projects completely upended the leadership in the House of Representatives, and the ripples didn't stop there. By May 2026, the Senate experienced its own major leadership transition. It has been a whirlwind of shifting alliances and strict demands for accountability. To put these unprecedented shifts into perspective, check out this comparison. Over in the Senate, the presidency moved from Francis Escudero, briefly over to Tito Soto, and then landed with Alan Peter Cayetano in May 2026. At the exact same time, over in the House of Representatives, the speakership transitioned from Martin Romualdez to Boji Dai. These aren't just minor administrative tweaks, guys. They represent a fundamental realignment of political power across the country's legislative branches.
Which brings us to Section 4, House Speaker Leadership Crisis, a change at the helm. Let's zero in specifically on the House of Representatives for a second, because the events of September 2025 were basically a political earthquake.
So here's the crucial point. On September 17, 2025, Martin Romualdez stepped down as House Speaker. This resignation happened right in the middle of mounting allegations regarding budget insertions and anomalous government projects. He was succeeded by Representative Bo G. Dai, who stepped into the role promising a new era of cooperation, aiming to clean up the government and push for a united Philippines.
Now into Section 5, the flood control scandal, billions in question. What exactly triggered that sudden change in leadership we just talked about? Well, this scandal was the main catalyst for all the political upheaval.
And this brilliantly illustrates the public and legal response to that scandal. What we're looking at is a legal petition for certiorari and prohibition, filed by concerned citizens and taxpayers, including figures like Attorney Israeli Torian, to vindicate constitutional limits on governmental power. It represents a very direct, documented pushback from civil society against the alleged misuse of public resources.
Look closely at page 182 of that same petition. What you're seeing here is the sheer volume of legal professionals literally attaching their names and their reputations to this document. They are demanding judicial relief on what they term issues of transcendental public importance.
And the signatures just keep going on page 183. This really visualizes the massive public outcry. The controversy centered around billions of pesos allocated for Department of Public Works and Highways flood control projects. With allegations of massive kickbacks linked to high-profile lawmakers, the legal action we see here reflects a citizenry absolutely demanding strict accountability.
Just to give you a quick summary of the investigation's facts, the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee resumed its probe in September 2025. During those hearings, former DPWH engineers and officials actually publicly linked multiple personalities across both the Senate and the House of Representatives to payoffs. Consequently, the National Bureau of Investigation recommended filing criminal charges for indirect bribery and malversation of public funds, which led to massive calls for a fully independent commission to uncover the truth.
Finally, Section 6, Youth, Language, and Politics, the voice of the future. So how do these shifting political tides connect back to that Gen Z identity and language we discussed earlier? Well, they are deeply intertwined.
Listen, Gen Z does not just sit out of political discourse, they just play it by their own rulebook. They use sound-alike nicknames to bypass censors or critique politicians. They weaponize memes to broadcast complex political perspectives in seconds. They use terms like prostitute to call out media bias, and invent phrases like Orange App to completely bypass digital keyword bans on platforms like TikTok. Their everyday language has literally become a direct mechanism for political resistance.
This quote from recent market research hits the nail on the head. It says, Filipino Gen Z wields slang as a powerful tool for political expression, using humor and irony to challenge authority and critique social issues. They are taking that exact same linguistic creativity we saw in words like deserve and pet malu and applying it to demand accountability from the very names and power we've discussed today. Their language is their leverage.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer today. We've journeyed all the way from the deeply rooted mythology of baby names through the clever linguistic shifts of Gen Z straight into the heart of a political earthquake in the Philippine Congress. It just goes to show you that identity is never static. It's constantly negotiated through the words we use and the leaders we hold accountable. So I want to leave you with this final thought. How do you see your own culture's evolving language shaping your political landscape? Think about the slang you use every single day. What kind of power does it actually hold? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the world around you.